Is your patience stubbornness in disguise? We could go around the houses all day long trying to figure out exactly what patience means and exactly what stubbornness means, but arguing about definitions won't actually lead to any meaningful change. And that's the whole point of this video. How do we take a complicated, abstract question and come to an answer which is so simple and obvious that you think, oh, obviously, why couldn't I see this before? So to make this practical, we need to root a problem into a context so that we can change our behaviors within that context. I'm operating on the generalized assumption here that patience is a skill and stubbornness is a flaw in the majority of settings, but there is going to be some nuance to this if you wanted to go a little bit deeper into it in your own time. So, first step, let's root this into a specific context, and I've come up with a question just to help frame out this video. I am setting up a new coaching business and progress so far in the first 6 months has been slower than I expected. What should I do? Keep going, quit, pivot the business, or some entirely different option? I'm making up this scenario, but we can analyze this question in multiple ways because there's no simple right versus wrong answer with a question like this. And it's not clear from the outset whether this person is being patient or stubborn, and that's the key underlying problem. I'm going to go down 2 routes to make this simple and practical. And I'm taking this framework from this lovely little paragraph in this book, Same as Ever. And it's on page 165. And it's also where I adapted the title for this video, or the first line for this video. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this on here. In fact, if I can change this, it might be that you can actually read it alongside me, which is just this section here, just in there highlighted. Doing long-term thinking well requires identifying when you're being patient versus stubborn, which is not an easy thing to do. The only solution is knowing the very few things in your industry that will never change and putting everything else in a bucket that's in constant need of updating and adapting. The few, very few things that never change are candidates for long-term thinking. Everything else has a shelf life. And just sort out that focus again. So let's break that down. First of all, we have got the time frame. So straight away, we can think about this as the short term and the long term. So again, what we're doing is we're trying to make this practical. So we need to define what these 2 words actually mean. In this case, I'm going to say anything under 6 months is short term and 6 months and over is long term. You might disagree with me, that's absolutely fine. The key thing is that we have taken something abstract, like time frame, and made it practical by putting measurable numbers on it. And that's one of the key points to consider for a question like this. How do we make the abstract more grounded, more measurable, more practical? And second, we have what I'm just going to refer to as changeability. Which aspects of this coaching business and industry are changeable and which are unchangeable? And this helps us to orient our attitude towards each of these specific considerations. Instead of questioning why things are the way that they are and becoming frustrated and passing the blame and being very past focused, instead we can think of our attitude towards the facts and the way the world actually is, which is very present and future focused. We might not necessarily like the conclusions that we come to, but they are at least grounded in reality rather than being abstract, which is the whole purpose of this. So when we arrange these factors, we can place our focus on a specific area each time. We've got short-term unchangeable, long-term unchangeable, short-term unchangeable, long-term unchangeable. And at a glance already, it's going to be much more practical than our original question, which was, is your patience stubbornness in disguise? You might be able to intuitively figure out a direction already just from these headings. And that's the beauty of reading books like this and the other ones that I recommend on this channel. It's because what we're doing is we're adding structure to give clarity to a real problem in your actual life. We're not just passively reading and seeing no changes. Although I've made up this example, you can probably see easily how this would be relevant for you in your situation. So let's have a little look at some of these options. Firstly, the short-term and changeable. Within the coaching business context, this could refer to my messaging, my offer, my pricing, how I structure my day, and so on. Taking that further into long-term changeable, I might consider how I could improve my skills, which niche that I operate in, my reputation, how I offer my service, and things like that. The short-term unchangeable factors could be the fact that within my niche, there are already many successful businesses with 10 years of credibility and trust that are already operating. There might be big geopolitical events that are happening at this specific point in time. It might be that my skill level isn't at where I want it to be right now, or even how I'm getting the message out there. So, for example, the algorithm not pushing out a video or a post as much as I wanted it to. But then you've also got the long-term unchangeable aspects, like people always wanting to transform their situation from pain to fulfillment, to seeking human connection and mentorship, to pushing their own limits and self-actualizing, and wanting structure or a person that they can trust. So the conclusion is pretty clear and simple from what was a difficult question to begin with already. I could consider myself to be patient and stay in the business if I focused the majority of my effort on planning in accordance to long-term unchangeable principles, whilst keeping flexible for long-term changeable possibilities. And these will become obvious as I get more information. I don't need to have a perfect granular plan. I just need the awareness of the key principles and the willingness to adapt in accordance with them. It also means that I don't need to stress too much about short-term changeable options, because I can just change things that are in line with the long-term unchangeable principles. And if some aspects in the short term are unchangeable, then I just need to adjust my attitude towards them and learn to accept them. I've already made another video on that topic about fulfillment and success, and there's another practical diagram in that one too. But just to wrap a nice, neat little bow on this particular topic of when does patience become stubbornness? Well, it becomes a lot easier thanks to a really simple grid like this. It's when I'm focusing too much on the wrong areas. It's when I'm unwilling to be flexible and adaptable, both in the short term and in the long term changeability. It's when I'm not able to accept unchangeable factors and I fight against the inevitable. To use a very overly simplified and very trite point, I can complain all day that it's raining outside, or I could just use an umbrella. Just keep it simple, keep it practical. And I'm trying to enjoy a late spring in the north of Britain as I'm recording this. So you can probably imagine that is a very real and relevant problem for me right now as I'm recording this video. So, I know this conclusion might sound really obvious, but the focus of this video isn't the conclusion itself. It's how do you put the structure in place so that you can more effectively analyze a question. Is your patience stubbornness in disguise is an extremely difficult question to answer, but focus on long-term unchangeable factors and stay flexible to changeable ones is extremely simple and practical as a solution. So do you see what I mean now when I said at the start of the video, how do we take a complicated abstract question and come to an answer which is so simple and so obvious that you think, oh, obviously, why couldn't I see that before? Well, that walkthrough is just an example of one process that you could do to repeatedly get to that obvious conclusion. I've taught philosophy and religion for over 10 years at the time of recording this video, and I've studied it much longer than that to know the frustrations around abstract questions. And as a result, I've recommended this book before, Philosophy as a Way of Life. And that, combined with this book, Same as Ever, can definitely help to keep you sane in these confusing times when you're stuck with a question like our original one. Same as Ever is a very simple read in comparison to Philosophy as a Way of Life. And I'll definitely talk about both of these a lot more in another time, especially this one. But that's it for now. And I love a good philosophical discussion, but sometimes I'm just looking for a practical answer. And that's an example of how I might move from that former to that latter, from that complicated abstract question to that very simple, unbelievably obvious answer. But it only becomes obvious once we've actually got the structure in place. Okay, see you soon in another lesson.